broadcasting from the Unshackled Studios in Melbourne. This is WilmsFront, brought to you by theunshackled.net. Now here's Tim Wilms.
Hello everyone and welcome to the first Sunday night WilmsFront for quite a while. It is the 24th of November 2019. It is 8 p.m. here in Melbourne. We are live on the Tim Wilms YouTube channel, and we are also live on Entropy, which is the YouTube enhanced software. The link has been put in the live chat. My lovely moderator will continue to put the live link in there throughout the show, so you can join us and interact and donate throughout the show. Now, today is actually 12 years exact since Kevin Rudd was elected Prime Minister of Australia, and that was the beginning of probably the most radical transformation of Australia. Rudd just turned 18 at the time, which in Australia means you come of age, you can drink, smoke, drive, gamble, do whatever. But it was also the beginning of the major global disruption, both economically and politically, that began basically the year after with the global financial crisis. I've just turned 30, as you know. It's worth reflecting on the changes since then. When I was born, the Berlin Wall was just coming down, but it seems that communism is back in fashion, especially amongst the youth. Free speech continues to die. Another person who turned 30 nearly the exact same time as me is Blair Cottrell. We're both from the South East suburbs of Melbourne. Obviously, we've had very different life experience, but we've both had 30 years on this earth and seen changes both globally and locally. So Blair, happy belated birthday.
Thanks, mate. You too.
Now, obviously, what people will be most interested in hearing first is that, it was during your birthday, you were on trial, your appeal trial at the County Court of Victoria for your blasphemy conviction, as I call it. If you look up the actual definition of blasphemy and what is in Section 25(2) of the Racial and Religious Tolerance Act, which you were convicted under in 2017, it does fit the definition of blasphemy. Now, it stems from during your United Patriots Fronts activism against the application and approval process for the Bendigo Mosque. To promote a rally, you, Neil Erickson and Christopher Shortis headed a mock dummy outside the Bendigo City Council building and uploaded it to Facebook, and the dummy had mock blood coming out of it. And basically, I was in there for all 4 days of court. That the reason you are the only person prosecuted under this because the video was so big, it as the section says, it caused revulsion, ridicule and contempt, the video.
That's what is being put forward by the prosecution, by the state government prosecution, yeah. And the Attorney General's office as well, actually.
Because I actually hadn't seen the full video, because it's not just the beheading stunt there. It is also, it's got marching afterwards, apparently marching. That's also sinister as well, with Australian flags. And you can, I said to you at the time that you can understand how the 2015 normie might be scared, intimidated or threatened by that, even though that was not your intention, because you were convicted along with Neil Erickson, or you were the only one convicted. Neil Erickson and Christopher Shortis got $2,000 fines, so did you, but that it was your intent to create this video, and that's what the prosecution has to prove.
It was my intent to, through the video, incite serious contempt, revulsion, or severe ridicule of Muslim people. That's what they're trying to prove, and that's what the trial consisted of. Trial that began on my birthday and for the few days after as well. Went for a few days after.
And you took the stand. You were represented by a patriot lawyer, John Bolton. He was your sole legal representative. There were two from the Victorian Director of Public Prosecution's office, and then there was 3 from the Attorney General's Department, two barristers, and then, for those who don't know, there's a barrister and then there's a solicitor who sits opposite and sort of does notes. So there was 5 versus 1.
Yeah, so the situation there is 5 government lawyers, barristers and solicitors from both the Department of Public Prosecutions of Victoria and the Attorney General's office. If you don't know, the Attorney General is basically the government's highest ranking law expert, against little old me and my barrister John Bolton, and that's how it played out.
Now, obviously, you were convicted in September 2017. The trial took place in November 2019. It was supposed to take place in August, but the judge who was going to hear that case, Judge Lisa Hannon, she received a promotion to Chief Magistrate of the Victorian Magistrates Court. So the judge presiding over the case was Chief Judge Peter Kidd, who everyone knows who he is because he was the one who presided over George Pell's 2 trials and the eventual jury guilty verdict and sentenced him to 6 years in prison. And obviously, Chief Judge, that means there's a lot of judges in the County Court of Victoria, but he's the head one there.
Yeah.
I thought overall he had my impression, open mind. He was basically very, he gave a lot of time to both John Bolton and the opposing counsel, basically to propose their arguments, and he never was hostile, I felt, sort of once.
When you're a judge, it's your job to be unbiased and, objective. You're supposed to hear the facts, and you're supposed to come to a finding based on the facts. So at the very least, as a judge, you've got to pretend to be unbiased and patient. It doesn't necessarily mean you are unbiased and patient. But I didn't have a problem with the judge throughout the trial, with Chief Judge of the County Court, Peter Kidd. However, I believe it's unlikely that you become Chief Judge of the County Court without rubbing shoulders with some, high-ranking bureaucrats in political offices, and that doesn't make me very comfortable that he'll find or make a finding that's beneficial for me. But the only problem I had with him, there wasn't any major problem, as I said, but the only issue I took was when I was in the witness box on the second day, answering questions put to me by the state prosecutor and my own barrister. He wasn't really happy for me to be expanding too much on details regarding my political activity, my upbringing, and what led me into politics and what ultimately led up to the mock beheading and the protest against the Mosque development in Bendigo. He kind of reprimanded John and me in that process and asked me to be more succinct, which I don't think he should have done. It's probably in his interests to know the full story of my political activity in making his finding, but that's what he chose to do at the end of the day. That's the only real issue I took with his presiding over my trial.
The way I saw it, it's when you're on the witness stand, it's not meant to be a soapbox.
No, but I still think that my engagement in politics and my interest in it, what led me to be engaged in it, is all very relevant to my alleged offending, or what the government alleges is my offending. So I don't think he should have stopped me from explaining my political activity in the witness box, but he chose to, so I had to. So.
But you were cross-examined as well by the state prosecutor, and it seemed the strategy was trying to get you to admit that you wanted to cause offence to Muslims. And I was actually surprised it wasn't really touched upon in the trial, that because you're accused of vilifying a class of people, but not all Muslims practice beheading. Obviously, the Arab countries governed by Sharia law, they practice beheading, but it's certainly not a shared universal Muslim value.
Sure. Well, after I was questioned by the state prosecutor, she asked the judge to basically not believe anything I said and that nothing I said matters. What does that mean? It means that everything I said in the witness box works against their effort to prosecute me. It means I did well for myself. Basically, the prosecution is always going to accuse you of lying when they ask you questions in the witness box.
That word was never used, though, which I found interesting.
Yeah, because it might be a strong accusation to make that this person's lying. She said I was being evasive and therefore nothing that I said matters. And Their argument is that in the video of the mock beheading itself, of us cutting the head off a dummy made out of pillows and fake blood spilling out of it, in that video itself, there's enough evidence for this judge to find that I am guilty of inciting serious contempt, revulsion, or severe ridicule, and that nothing I say about my political activity, my political beliefs, my political motivations, my understanding of Islam, nothing I say matters. That I'm guilty no matter what I say. And that was the argument made by the state prosecutor, and it wasn't challenged by the Attorney General's office.
Well, I felt that the role of the Attorney General's office there was to both uphold the Racial and Religious Tolerance Act as being consistent with the Victorian Charter of Human Rights and Responsibility and the Australian constitutional implied freedom to political communication, which we all learned is not an individual right, it's a restraint on legislative power. And it seems to me that the State Attorney General wasn't concerned with your guilt or not, just upholding the legislation. And we heard about the background about why Racial and Religious Tolerance Act was necessary. That's because we needed to protect multicultural Australia, because that's how Australia is. And what I found fascinating is that restricting your political communication, your right to free speech, actually enhances political communication and free speech, because your video, it could have intimidated Muslims from participating in the political process. That's the argument put forward.
Yeah, I found that fascinating as well. It's an interesting way to put it. There isn't any evidence that any Muslims have been excluded from political communication as a result of me speaking or demonstrating. Actually, there's every bit of evidence that suggests the opposite. Muslims in the Bendigo area actually disguised my political activity in the area as a blessing in disguise, because they met a lot of friends in government and media, which helped them to get their mosque project built and helped them to get plenty of money from the government. So realistically, the Muslims should probably be in court thanking me and saying that, let this guy go, because the result of his political activity has only benefited us, because the government's more sympathetic to us now. But as I said, like, their claim that my demonstrations and my speech is ostracizing, alienating, and removing Muslims from political communication is subjective and based on their own opinion. There's no evidence that suggests that's taken place.
I mean, let's have a look at 2019. You're banned from mainstream media, but has any Muslim been banned from...
Well, there you go. It's so often the case with my engagement in politics that everything I'm accused of doing, I'm actually the victim of myself. I'm accused of being racist or, being discriminatory, but it feels as though that the state government and its bureaucrats have an issue with my race, the race that I belong to. I'm accused of, basically removing Muslims from political communication or making it harder for them to engage in political process or even society because of my activism, when in reality, every effort has been made by large corporations, state government, media, to disclude me and censor me from, basically disqualify me from taking place in political process and political communication. So it's all a big projection, I think. Everything I'm accused of doing, the government and the media is actually doing to us.
You've often been accused of, formerly Twitter and now Gab, of engaging in conspiracy theories about the prosecution that you face. But to my way of thinking, it's basically, this is what the law is designed to do. It's not a conspiracy. We saw it in court that we do not have free speech in Australia, and if free speech it's supposed to be designed to have equal participation in public life. That's the judge is basically, we don't know his decision yet, but he's got to apply the law as is, or how the High Court through various court cases has interpreted it.
As it's been interpreted. He doesn't apply the law as it is. He applies the law, in this case, as he is choosing to interpret it based on other interpretations made by High Court judges. So the law is a very interpretable thing. It's never really that solid until it's been used a number of times by a series of judges, and therefore it's taken on a certain form and can be referred to, through various reference points. In this case, the argument of the state prosecution and the Attorney General's office is that Australians have no right to free speech, that anybody can be censored, jailed, disqualified from engaging in political communication, so long as political communication as a whole is not affected in this country. So as long as censoring or even locking up an individual doesn't affect politics in Australia, generally speaking, then it's all okay. And that's what the prosecution and the Attorney General's office, Labor government, is proposing to this judge. And that's what they would like the judge to make a ruling on. They would like the judge to make a finding in their favour on that.
Well, they also argued that this is the only speech you've been prosecuted for. You've been able to say lots of other things on Facebook and Twitter. Of course, you're not there anymore, but that was their position. You're still free to say what you want.
Yeah, which is not true. And they had to pull back once, do you remember, when they tried to suggest that the police closing businesses or encouraging local businesses in Bendigo to close before one of our rallies and then blaming it on us and saying that we were guilty of economic terrorism. So we actually held our rally after that in Rosalind Park in Bendigo, so they couldn't do that to us again. The prosecution was asking me questions in relation to that, trying to suggest that negative attention from the police was a result of the mock beheading video. But all of that happened before the mock beheading video. It happened before our first ever rally in Bendigo, before we had even become active in politics. So we were on the end of a great deal of hostility from local police, local media, local government agencies from the minute we even talked about setting foot in Bendigo. You know, so she pulled back on that very quickly, because it probably, if I answered those questions or if she harped on that point, it would have indicated the opposite of what she was trying to put across, that actually we were the ones that were on the end of the hostility and not the poor innocent Muslims in Bendigo. Yeah.
Well, the Bendigo faithful, as they're known, they came to court to support you. They've come to not just yours, but other local patriots who've been at court, and they were because it was alleged at the time that you were just blow-ins, but you were invited there. And 4 years later, those Bendigo activists against the construction of the mosque, they're still there, they're still making their voices heard, and they've managed to, or we don't know, that the mosque only broke ground this year, a few months ago, I think in June, when Daniel Andrews put the shovel in the ground and gave $400,000 of Victorian taxpayers' money.
Yeah, I wonder if Daniel Andrews ended up with calluses on his hands after putting that shovel into the ground. It's probably the first time he's ever picked up a shovel in his life. Daniel Andrews, if you don't know, is the Victorian State Premier, you know, from the illustrious political class. You know, probably a lot of working class people wouldn't even know his name. But yeah, I find it funny that the state government had to end up funding this mosque and making it very public that they were funding the mosque because, you know, the whole counter-protest saga against us was based on this perception that we were all fascists in league with the state and the police, racists that were secretly friends with the police and state government. And now you turn around and the state government is giving $400,000 to the Muslim community, taking me to court for offending the Muslim community, censoring me. I think it's a result of state government pressure on social media companies from posting anything on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, closing my bank account, preventing me from having a PayPal account. So I really don't think anybody, any sensible person could seriously believe that there's some sort of relationship between the quote-unquote right wing in Australia and the government. Realistically, there's every indication to believe that the other side of politics is receiving all the assistance they need from government, media, corporations, and academic bureaucrats of all sorts.
But didn't you say that during the leftist protest against that mining conference, one of the local police did the OK sign? So that shows, well,
that proves that all police are fascists.
Well, you know? they wanted a inquiry into racism in the Victoria Police based on one of them doing the OK sign, and another one had over his thing AED, which stands for Eat a Dick Hippie.
Well, I think a lot of individual police officers probably have good moral standards. Depending on his rank, though, he might be sacked. If he's of high enough rank, then he'll maintain his job, but see what happens. Well, it's just an individual case.
Now, you mentioned your bank account being shut. First, it was you, because You solicited donations from your supporters first via PayPal. Your PayPal was shut down then directly to your Westpac bank account, and then that was shut down in June, they said, for commercial reasons, and we're not going to tell you about our commercial imperatives, which you would have seen in the news this week. Westpac has been under investigation by the financial transaction watchdog, and they facilitated, was it 23 million illegal transactions, including ones which were for child pornography in the Philippines, and which basically it seems to me that they closed your account because their basic understanding was, oh, we better shut down anyone's account who might be involved in or controversial activity.
I don't know. I heard that the reason they intended to close my bank account from the beginning was a number of shareholders for MasterCard were Marxists or involved in Marxist groups, and they had been putting pressure on Westpac for a long time, but Westpac basically had been ignoring them. But then it's possible that they caught wind of the fact that maybe they were going to be in trouble for something else, and so they thought they might try to appease these people, these, members of political class and bureaucratic elites, and soften the blow that was coming by banning some extreme right-wing figures using their services. I don't know why it was done. They didn't tell me. So
It was also ANZ. They went further, just not even prominent nationalist figures, just supporters who maybe had memberships or loose associations with various nationalist groups. They got their bank accounts closed as well.
Yeah, I heard ANZ was the worst offender, but I'm really not sure. I made a comment about it when I started to realize that it wasn't just people active in politics whose bank accounts were being closed, but known associates and family members as well. People who might be able to support those people who had already had their bank accounts closed. That's when I thought it was newsworthy. But obviously mainstream media journalists and editors don't agree with me on that fact because they haven't reported a single case of a person losing a bank account because of their political views.
Well, there was some mainstream media coverage of sex workers getting their bank account closed. That was reported as discrimination.
Yeah, but not in this case because it's nasty white males getting their bank accounts closed, so that's okay.
Yeah. I just raised that because obviously Patriots getting their bank account shut, that's what's political discrimination, but there's no outrage about that. But apparently these sex workers getting their bank account closed, that's a huge outrage.
No, the pre-programmed outrage mob only gets outraged about things that they've been told they can be outraged about.
But it's interesting that, well, we have, it's basically a banking. Well, there's 4 big banks now. It was NAB, Westpac, Commonwealth Bank, ANZ, and of course the banks, well, they have a banking license, but they also have a lot of privileges, and banking is an essential service. You use your card every day, most of the time. Well, every business now has the tap and go, and the federal government, they're now looking at banning cash transactions over $10,000.
They already have it. I thought they already had.
It's going to pass. It hasn't come into effect yet. That's supposedly cracked down on illicit activity. But this is the point that I come down to. It's basically they want to break you. That's what they want to do by basically trying to close every type of way that you can live a normal life.
Every type of free interaction and transactions. So everything you do is digital, computerized, and can be cancelled, essentially. But that's not going to achieve much in the long run. It's just going to push people into crime. I mean, if you can't legally make money and purchase things legally because it's made impossible for you, then people will just start robbing and stealing. So I really don't know what they intend to do with that. I'm not really worried. I mean, I can support myself regardless of what they do to me, and I've always said that from the start. But it doesn't have any sort of, in my view, any long-term beneficial effect for them, for this current political class and government, if they're going to financially asphyxiates and strangulate people or political dissidents to the extent where they can't participate in society legally, they'll just do it illegally then. They'll just become criminals. Maybe that's what they want, so they can just call all right-wing people or conservative people criminals. But I don't know, like, it's going to be interesting to see where it goes, but...
But it shows, obviously, given what we know about Westpac this week, and obviously they shut down your bank account because they wanted to show that they were tolerant and believed in social justice, and of course all the banks they supported same-sex marriage. I think a lot of them support Indigenous recognition in the Constitution, or what it is now, voice to Parliament. And of course, I remember you posted this out on Gab, that these corporations, they've basically tricked, who 10 years ago were the people who hated the corporations, they've basically tricked these people into loving them, even though while they're doing all this virtue signalling stuff, of course we've just seen, well, there was the Banking Royal Commission before that, they've been behaving appallingly.
Yeah, well, for lack of a better term, it's just so gay. I'm sorry to say it, but it's just gay. Like, why would you be afraid of a bunch of people screaming at you? And the real problem is what these corporations don't understand. I don't know whether they're linked into a big network that tells them what they have to do or not. If they're caving to the demands of hysterical Marxists really is just the result of Marxist hysteria. What they don't understand, these corporations, is when they give an inch to these Marxists, calling them racist and sexist and homophobe and whatnot, then the Marxists go harder. They take a mile to see how completely they can bring these corporations under their full control. It's like a shark sensing blood in the water. When you start to try to appease these people even just a little bit, they come at you harder, 100 times harder, until they've got you completely by the balls. Because that's what they do. They search for weakness. They hunt for weakness. If they can't find weakness, they'll try to create it by lying and creating all of this mendacious language to make you guilty and in fear of something. So Marxism, communism, all of these social justice warriors, they're bottom feeders. They look for weakness, they create weakness, they search for weakness, and then they exploit weakness. And if all these corporations have to do is simply say, fuck off, and nothing would happen to them. If they did that from the start, if this country from the start just looked at communism and said, fuck off, and continuously was vigilant about the different forms of communism, the different subversive programs that communism was using to infiltrate this country, if they could easily identify them and just say, fuck off, fuck off, fuck off, then this country would be fine still to this day. But as a result of weakness, we're in the position we're in right now.
Well, the perfect example of what you just described is Facebook. They banned you, Neil Erickson, Ricky Turner, Tom Sewell, that you can't even look at Facebook now, even without an account. You're permanently disabled from it if you try to create a... And obviously Facebook, they have this dangerous individuals policy, and Australian Meditation's Facebook page was deleted for posting a photo of you and Neil Erickson outside of court. But as we've seen today, or over the weekend, Sacha Baron Cohen, well, he's made a living basically of, well, he would say, comedy, but it's basically slander against people he doesn't like. He was getting a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Anti-Defamation League, which is a Jewish lobby group in the United States. And he said that Facebook is basically being the biggest propaganda machine of all time because, well, Mark Zuckerberg, he was before the US Congress about a month ago, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the Democratic Socialist, said, "Oh, you're not taking down ads, political ads which are misleading," which basically
means any political ad that isn't socialist.
Yes, but Sacha Baron Cohen said that Facebook, Joseph Goebbels would have loved it, and Hitler would have been able to advertise the final solution on Facebook. And this is the thing, Facebook's, they banned all of you, but they still haven't won because they're wanting...
More and more.
And The Guardian even did, I was just reading today, they did a big expose on all the white nationalists who are still allowed on Facebook.
Well, they've gotten results by complaining and sooking and lying. And because they've gotten results, because Facebook's rolled over a little bit and showed some weakness, as I said, now they're going in for the kill. Now they know they can get more results if they keep complaining and lying more. So that's just what it goes to show what I was just, an example of what I was talking about.
And I liked Mark Zuckerberg saying, "Oh, we can't ban these political ads because of free speech."
Oh yeah. Well, I was a colleague of mine was just banned or limited in some way for posting a photo of me, and the reason he was given a reason. The photo of me, according to Facebook, violates Facebook's community standards on dangerous individuals. Yeah. So I'm really, that really sounds believable when Sacha Baron Cohen, if that's how you say it, says that Facebook would have allowed Hitler to advertise the genocide of Jews if he paid enough, but they won't allow a photograph of me because I'm a dangerous individual. It really adds up, doesn't it? It's just ridiculous what these Hollywood elites say and accuse people of. It's usually the opposite of what's true. Like one more thing on that. Sacha Baron Cohen specifically said, I read his statement. He said that Facebook was interfering in the electoral process, right? Basically by allowing a diverse amount of information to free flow through people's computers, through people's fields of vision, by giving access to free information from various different sources, rather than just one source of mainstream media or various different labels all essentially representing one source. That was undermining democracy somehow. So what that means is what this Hollywood elitist is basically saying is that democracy only works when people are only told one thing from one source of news. But when you're getting lots of different information from lots of different sources of news, that's not democracy, that's election interference and anti-Semitism. That's what he said. In effect, he just said the opposite of what is the truth.
Well, they also still haven't given Facebook for allowing Cambridge Analytica to be hired by the Trump and Brexit campaign, because I watched a documentary on it, it's called The Great Hack, and it's basically that their hypothesis is that the public were stupid and they believed all the fake things that Trump and the Brexit campaign were saying, and this is there needs to be and they were able to get away with it. There is legitimate privacy concerns about it because of the third party sharing of information, but the main hypothesis is that all this information was getting out without a filter.
Yeah, I don't know what kind of filter. Who's going to determine? Yeah. It's just, I don't know. Well, they shouldn't have created it. They shouldn't have let it happen in the first place. If these big globalist bureaucrats and your illustrious bankers and people who control the political narrative, who pick presidents, destroy presidents, control the media, tell media bosses what they have to report, if they wanted to maintain their grip on global control, they shouldn't have allowed Facebook in the first place. So, it's their own fault.
Yes. Now, obviously, the appeal process has taken 2 years from the original trial in September 2017, and it's fair to, or we will never know the exact reason that your appeal, you're the only one who was found guilty who decided to appeal. So your PayPal bank account closed, Facebook deleted, and obviously you've had to pay legal expenses. You've had to have time off work because courts, they sit Monday to Friday.
Yeah, and they basically don't give a fuck about you.
Yes.
Like that's the way courts operate.
And so my question is, was this all worth it? Because you heard the arguments in court that they made a pretty convincing case that the law is Racial and Religious Tolerance Act is not constitutional, and it is not violating the Victorian Charter of Human Rights and Responsibilities. And so the only positive result that could come for you is your conviction gets overturned.
I don't think that's the only positive result. Like, you don't know what's going to happen. It's probably unlikely that I'll get any victory just because we're up against the state's best lawyers. And it's 5 lawyers and solicitors, the Attorney General's office, against John Bolton and myself. It was just way too much resources pumped in by the state government to try to get this law upheld. But you don't know what's going to happen. It might all be worth it at the end of the day. But regardless of the amount of money I spent, the amount of my time that was used, I promised people I would take it all the way to the end. I said after the magistrate's hearing that I was going to appeal to county because county court judges, in my experience, they do a better job. They're in the county court rather than magistrates because they're dealing with serious issues. They're dealing with homicides. They're dealing with, burglaries. They're dealing with serious crime all of the time. And so they they're sending people to jail for long periods, county court judges. The higher you go in court, Supreme and High Court above County Court, the more likely you are to get a better finding, a more reasonable and fair finding. And so I never intended to wear the magistrate's conviction from the beginning. And just, as I said, I told people I'd take it all the way to the end, and that's what I did.
Obviously the trickiest thing for them to, you're found guilty in the magistrate's court, but because the law says that you had to intend to incite this revulsion, ridicule, and severe contempt, and that's what your cross-examination was about, trying to basically psychoanalyze you.
Yeah, that's what the conviction's about. That's important for everyone watching this to understand. Like, I have not been accused of committing any crime through conduct.
It is a criminal. It's the only criminal provision in the Act. That's Section 25(2).
Yeah, the conduct I was engaged in, like a pretend dummy, like we're pretending to behead it with fake blood. It's not the conduct itself that's being deemed criminal, but it's my intent. It's why I was doing that they're trying to make a crime. They're trying to go inside my head and say he was doing this protest, this demonstration, because he wanted to go out there and vilify, ridicule, revulsion, all those words they used, Muslim people. And that's all that was in his head. And the video that we're showing you here, Your Honour, Mr. Judge, proves that, regardless of anything he says. Everything he said, don't listen to him, believe us, he's guilty of a thought crime. That's essentially their argument.
And it's interesting that a few months prior, Fiona Patten, who's the Reason Party, formerly Sex Party, MLC, she's proposing the Racial and Religious Tolerance Amendment Act, which will expand, because it's just about racial and religious vilification. She wants to expand it to include sexual orientation, gender identity, and disability, and she wants to remove the intent requirement, that it just has to they just have to prove in future prosecutions or cases that it was capable of causing all of these ridicule.
Which goes a step further again.
Yes, which because obviously the reason I asked you that's the tricky point, because if this was under this amendment, they wouldn't need to prove the intent.
Under the amendment, if it was passed, and it probably will be passed. They always get what they want, these bureaucrats. The working class is too disengaged from politics and too busy. But that means that they can charge anyone with vilifying a specific group of people, regardless of intent, regardless of conduct. If they say you're guilty, you basically don't have any way to defend yourself. They can say, for this reason, this reason, and this reason, what this person said on Facebook could potentially have caused other people to become offended, therefore he's guilty of a criminal offence. And the judge basically has to find you guilty if that legislation is passed. Yeah.
Well, the trial is concluded. Chief Judge Peter Kidd has reserved his judgment because, as you saw, he's got, probably about 12 cases, High Court cases to read, which, if you're listening closely, they go to paragraph 300, so he's got a lot of homework, but he told us he'd be ready in weeks, not days, so we'll await to, your lawyer, John Bolton, will get notified, and obviously you'll get notified, and then obviously it'll appear in the court list, and Well,
hopefully we get notified. We weren't notified of a lot of things throughout this process. Hopefully we're told the date. But we'll see what happens there.
Now, the original reason I wanted to have you on this show is because, we're basically the same age. We're only born a few days apart. Born in November 1989, which, when we were born, the East Germans, they didn't wait for the Berlin Wall to get the demolish trucks in to remove it. They got whatever picks and axes, whatever, they tore it down themselves. And they'd been suffering in the Eastern European under communism post World War II, and basically they weren't, there was no famines, but basically the most obvious one is that there was not much food. Obviously you didn't have free political communication, and that was obviously at the time, 1999, considered a watershed moment, that communism was falling, and that's when China, even though it's still ruled by the Chinese Communist Party, abandoned the communist system, and eventually Vietnam did. But obviously 30 years later, communism is back, and a lot of that subversion has happened during our lifetime. Obviously, we were young children during the 1990s, and during that time, it's fair to say that the nuclear family, mother, father, children, was still in place. There wasn't too much divorce. I remember when I was at school, if it was the exception that a child, their parents were divorced, and everyone sort of was like, oh, that's a bit different, your parents are divorced. That's what I remember at the time. It was basically family and life structure were much simpler.
Yeah. Where I grew up in Frankston, divorce was, I wouldn't say common, but I wouldn't say uncommon either. I mean, there were a lot of single parents in Frankston, but there were a lot of parents that were still together too. My parents stayed together. For that, I'm grateful. But yeah, the concept of family has definitely changed, is a nice way of saying it. A more objective way of putting it would be to say that it's degraded or even been subverted. But communism never fell with the Berlin Wall. Communism in its physical form was a charade. It was a circus performance. Real communism is an institutional power. It's a psychological influence. It's not physical. It's not an army.
Well, they had to, it's fair to say, regroup for a number of years, because certainly it's fair to say that Lee Rhiannon, who was a Greens senator for a number of years, she was, during the Cold War, she was a Stalinist.
Mm.
She was a member of the Socialist Party of Australia, which was a pro-Stalinist party, and she edited a newspaper right up until the fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of the Soviet Union, which was basically a Soviet shilling publication. But after that, she joined the Australian Greens after the Soviet Union collapsed, which it took them a while to regroup, but they were certainly down and out for at least a few years. Obviously, now you mentioned obviously Frankston, where you grew up in the 90s. It had quite a bad reputation. There was Sarah McDermott, who disappeared from Cannock Station. She was never to be seen again. And then there was the serial killer, Paul Denyer, who killed 3 girls in the early 90s, which obviously freaked a lot of people out. And well, the end result of that was, well, even today, Frankston is still the butt of a lot of jokes. I mean, Trevor Marmalade and Dave Hughes, they make that endless Frankston jokes, along with Adelaide jokes as well. I would say it's certainly become a bit more gentrified since then, but it's still, it's still fair to describe it as a rough place, but it was also still, and it still is, largely white old Australia, and so is the Mornington Peninsula as well, which it's adjacent to.
Yeah, definitely. The whole southeast of Melbourne, hugging Port Phillip Bay, is still predominantly white. Inland, where all the new development homes are, cheap new homes built in what was essentially swampland before the developers bulldozed it all, that's where all the new immigration is being brought in too. And I remember, for example, Cranbourne, which is a suburb just inland from Frankston, where I grew up. Frankston is up against Port Phillip Bay. Just inland in Cranbourne, all white Australians too when I was growing up. Probably even a bit rougher than Frankston, actually. We used to fight the Cranbourne boys when we were younger, but on the weekends. But now Cranbourne is basically an Indian and Pakistani enclave.
Yes, and don't take our word for it. The Age actually wrote that recently, that it was basically the place where Indians are settling in Melbourne.
Yeah, and the only real difference you see in Frankston now, the majority of Frankston is populated by white working class families still. The impact of drugs and social degeneracy is worse now than it was when I was growing up. There's more homelessness. There's more disadvantaged families. There's more children roaming the streets on their own in the middle of the day, late at night. It's a bizarre place. But during the summer in particular, a lot of the immigrants from inland come to the beach.
Yes, and I've seen that as well when I had a barbecue at the Frankston foreshore.
Yeah, and it basically, at the Frankston foreshore, it basically looks like Little India there during the summertime because they all come there to swim and to hang out with their families. But that's demographically the main change. But yeah, all the southeast, as I said, up against hugging Port Phillip Bay of Melbourne is still predominantly white. Mostly, I think it's really highly densely populated now too. Like when I was young, I remember going to the shop, whether it was to Woolworths with my family or to the video shop, before DVDs. It was easy. It was not a headache. It wasn't crowded. There was no traffic. Now it's almost impossible. And everyone's so frustrated. There's no time. And there's so many people in Mornington and even further south from Mornington, down in places that used to just be holiday places where people had holiday houses, all down towards Sorrento. It is so packed. This is because the white Australian population has run away from all the inland developments. They've moved closer to the Port Phillip Bay, to the foreshore. And basically there's nowhere for them to go now unless they're going to pick up and move across the other side of the city and maybe to Ballarat or further out. If they're going to remain there and live in a culture which at least resembles what Australia once was, the Australia that they grew up in, European Australia, they're going to have to stay as close as they can to Port Phillip Bay and avoid going inland because inland is no longer Australia.
You wouldn't want to send your children to, I'd say, any school today because obviously there's the Safe Schools program. They've been indoctrinated into the climate change religion where, well, they're basically terrified that the world's going to end because of apocalyptic climate change in, 10 years? And we also see the history that they're taught is that white people are responsible for all the social injustices and war genocide crimes all throughout the world. But I recall the history Australian history, which of course we see the Invasion Day rallies every year now. The Australian history that I got taught is that colonial Australia, when Europeans settled, that was a positive thing that helped build the nation of today. And we weren't taught about Indigenous culture, but it was a complementary thing. It wasn't like it sort of is now that there's this racial tension. It was just that, there was also these native people. There was obviously a bit of trouble earlier on, but there's been reconciliation now, and now it's all sweet.
Yeah, I can mostly agree that was how it was. We did learn a lot about Aboriginal culture. Like we dressed up like Aboriginals when we were in prep in primary school. We wore like rags and stuff and painted our faces, and we used to make didgeridoos. We learned about the First Fleet and what was essentially, the start of the colonisation of Australia and the European settlement. But we didn't learn about it as though it were a negative thing, as you said. Like we learned about it as though it was just a fact of history, and it's how Australia came to be, the Australia that we hail from. But yeah, obviously the education curriculum was not as heavily politicized back when we were kids as it is now. And it's the typical tune of a Pied Piper, of a propagandist, to oversimplify the hell out of everything and blame everything on one enemy. Adolf Hitler said that it belongs to the leader of genius to make many different evils appear as though they belong to one category. And that's exactly what modern Marxism does. White men are responsible for everything. And every idiot out there, simplistic enough to believe it, follows along with the Pied Piper. Maybe it's time to think a little bit more about what you think you know if you're one of those people.
Now, the White Australia policy began to be dismantled in 1967. Then it was in the late 70s that what you'd call waves of non-white migrants began to arrive in Australia. And obviously in the early 90s, there was... you wouldn't say it was a flood like there is now, which meant that migrants, whether they came from Asia or the Middle East or the subcontinent, because they were coming to what was predominantly European cultural country, to fit in, they had to assimilate, which assimilation shouldn't be a dirty word. And I went to school with a few, not obviously down on the peninsula is majority white, but the ones who are non-white, they were basically, well, because they needed to be assimilated, they were basically no different from us. Even the Asians that I knew probably more in my teenage years, like for example, if you talk to them on the phone, you wouldn't know that they were Asian. Like they spoke like an Aussie. But what we're certainly seeing now with not just floods of migrants, and especially with the internet these days, you don't need to basically go out and integrate in your community. You can just get your, Hindi or Mandarin TV and just basically live, basically you're a virtual citizen of still your home country. And so we're seeing, and this is what schools have become, they've now gone back to basically having the social groups as just basically racial and religious tribes.
Yeah. There was only one Indian kid at our school that I remember. Every other kid was white at my primary school in Frankston. And he was one of our mates. Like, we didn't see him. We knew he was different, obviously, but he didn't behave differently. He was actually really funny. He had a good reputation with all the boys because he was funny. And I suppose from that point of view, or that level of immigration, maybe assimilation is a possible thing. You know, you can become spiritually white Australian, even if you're not white at that point. But I don't know what school's like now, but I can't imagine it's like that anymore. It seems, I see the kids walking home from school around the area where I live, and there seems to be huddles of Chinese kids, and then huddles of black kids, and then huddles of Indian kids. Everything's extremely racial tribal now. Like, picture like an American style prison TV program where it's, you know, races basically only associate with members of their own kind. It seems to be the result of our beautiful diversity and harmonious multicultural society that's legislated into state law. So I don't see how that's making us stronger. I've yet to see a single example, but you know, all the evidence points to the opposite. But I feel for the kids going to school these days. I don't know what it'd be like.
And of course, it's so easy for young children at school now to have written in their permanent record, which is sort of a de facto police record, that they made what we believe is a racist, sexist comment.
This is actually, that reminded me, I have a couple of friends who have kids going to school, and I think that the school system, directed by whoever's controlling the curriculum, is using children to inform on their own parents. They ask children to take home homework projects, and they're supposed to do them with their family. And some of the questions on the projects are, why is multiculturalism good for Australia? And how does diversity benefit Australia? Stuff like that. And the parents are supposed to answer the questions with the kids, and then the kid takes it back to the school, which is very, it's I don't feel comfortable with that. Mao in China, he came up with a way of basically identifying and executing dissidents. He put out a big call once and said, anyone out there who's got better ideas about how we can run the government, write in with your name and address so we know you're a citizen, and tell us your ideas and we'll take them into consideration. Everyone who wrote into the government ended up disappearing, you know, because they were thinking too much. And I think that this, you know, group family homework effort about diversity and how it benefits Australia as a way of getting children to inform on their parents, and then into a government data system, maybe the details of potentially dissident families will get logged. And what I mean by dissident is white working class families who don't agree with multiculturalism. Yeah.
Well, they have, well, it's not just safe schools now, there's the Respect for Relationships program, which is aimed at kindergarten to, it's basically a degendering program that pick up early signs of what's called toxic masculinity.
Yeah, well, if I had a great deal of power and influence in a country that I hated, I'd be doing that to their children as well. Like, you know, you're not going to, if you're controlling the institutions in a country that you've targeted to either transmute into a giant corporation for your own profit, or you've basically marked it for extermination. You don't want the children growing up to be strong, proud members of a nation with traditions, with moral structure, morally healthy, physically healthy. You want to destroy them every way you can. So, you can't really see it as unusual when every institution and, powerful entity in our country is unfriendly and even outrightly hostile. It's no surprise. Like, anyone who looks at the Safe Schools program and people trying to turn your kids into transsexuals or genderless, like, psychopaths or whatever they're trying to do to children, you can't be shocked by it, because people that run the education system and your government in your country, if you're living in Australia or anywhere in the West, they hate you. They don't like you. So how can you be shocked that they're trying to destroy your children? Of course that's what they're going to do. The question is, what are you going to do about it?
It's fair to say that for me in the early 2000s, that's when I would say the education system's agenda started to rub off on me. Obviously, that was after September 11, there was the Iraq War, and that's when people started to burn effigies of John Howard and George W. Bush. And basically, I felt that, reflecting on it now, that the school, what we were sort of being taught about and how we thought at school is basically like a Q&A episode, how everyone agrees with us and we don't understand why people, at the time, vote for John Howard and George W. Bush. And so that was basically because, it was probably because I was going to school down on the Mornington Peninsula, where we weren't affected by these social problems, that it's easier to convince people who aren't affected by these diversity problems that we know now that this is what we need. And it was also when I was in VC, that was when the economy was allegedly booming, and we were told that the economic advancement that had happened since the early 2000s was going to last forever. But of course, we saw the stock market crash of 2008. I went to university, study commerce. That's where Julia Gillard, as education minister, uncapped university places, which now university degrees are now pretty much worthless. That we can pretty much use them, a lot of them, as toilet paper. And the thing was, they encouraged everyone to go to university at that day, because that was they said the key to success. And of course what they created was a skills shortage in the actual trades. And so then of course they're trying to correct that now. You went down the trades route, but of course it's common knowledge that in your youth you spent time in prison for various offences, and that's been documented in other appearances that you made. But I don't think what you've ever been asked before is, like, when you were released from prison, how did you rebuild your life back then? Obviously you're young, but it was also because, of course, this is the digital age where every sort of employer likes to do a criminal background check. Like, for example, because how it used to work, if you studied a university degree and you became accredited, if you had a serious criminal record, they deny you the accreditation. So obviously with the trades, it's different. But how did you find it? Obviously, getting back on your feet.
It wasn't that hard, really. Like, I work hard, so people seek me out, and my family's been in the building industry for generations, so we've got a reputation. The last name is known in my area, my last name. But I don't work for anyone. I've never tried to really be employed by a third-party corporation that requires any sort of background check, because I don't want to work for anyone. I just want to trade my skill that I learned when I was young with a client for an agreed amount, with as little interference from a third party as possible. I'll pay tax because I have to, or I'll go to jail. But that's it. Like, it's really quite simple. If you just work hard and you put yourself out there, you make some business cards, you advertise yourself in whatever way you can, people will seek you out. Like, it's actually really hard for anyone to get a decent carpenter or a plumber to come out to their house to do something these days. Like, as you know, you wanted
Well,
to...
that's why there was that 457 visa program to get, because that was the other part of my question. They'd, in this 2000s economic boom, it's like, oh, if you want to make lots of money, the best way is go to university, get a degree. And it was really during that, well, it's still the case today, but basically being a tradie was demonized. That's only what drop kicks in school do.
Yeah, socially it was. However, there was government programs to assist us as well. There wasn't a lot, but I remember we got a tool grant. I think when you were officially signed on as an apprentice, you were given like $600 to $800 to spend on tools. That's all we got. And I still have a couple of tools that I bought with that grant, like, I don't know, what, 10, 12 years ago or something like that. So, or maybe 13 years ago. No, it would have been 15 years ago now. Yeah, forget how old I am. But yeah, like, there is classism in Australia. There really is. And it's actually not the fascist bourgeoisie against the proletariat communist working class. The opposite is the case. There's a communist political class, so-called academia and media elites, against the very patriotic working class. That's the classism that I experience and that every worker in this country experiences. We're basically looked down on because we work with our hands by these so-called intellectuals who all consider themselves socialists or something similar.
And what Marx wrote about the working class rising up, if it actually occurred in the way that he wrote, it would be a very different
result.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
well, every effort's been made by these elites to prevent a working class rise. They pretend they're all for workers' rights, but then when any worker actually stands up and demands that some of his rights be recognised, he's smashed down as a racist Nazi. You know, so it's really paradoxical, but you can see it makes sense if you look at it from their perspective, because they're just liars. They basically just take what is actually happening, flip it upside down, and explain it to you backwards, and expect you to believe them. Like, that's the way communists have always operated, I suppose.
University for me, I went to Monash Caulfield, which obviously is a fair distance away from the Mornington Peninsula, but it's actually, ironically, my experience at university, that's what red-pilled me on a lot of the cultural issues, because as I mentioned, during the 2000s, I was basically at school, like, accepted the cultural left consensus, but well, what I basically found out at university, and it was shared by a lot of people, that basically I would say the cultural divide was, it was true. Like the Asian students behaved in a certain way, so did the Indian students, and obviously being closer to the city, you see some of these integration problems that you didn't see down on the Mornington Peninsula. And so it was actually, that's what actually made me more of a realist in the world, my university experience, which I don't think many people can sort of...
I don't see integration problems when I go into Melbourne. I see a total ethnic replacement. Like, if you've got... All right, you want to talk about integration, right? If you've got, let's say, 80% Australian
you know
people...
I'm saying that word ironically.
Yeah, I know too, yeah. But, like, what is integration at the end of the day? Is it... If we arrive at a point in the future where 95% of Australia is Asian, African, Indian and Arabic, but they're all voting for Australian political parties, obeying Australian law, and wearing Australia Pride hats, is that integration? No, it's not. It's ethnic replacement. It's a genocide process, and it can't be looked at as anything else unless you're a communist and it's in your interest to rule over a bunch of idiots instead of a homogenous nation of proud and strong people. But yeah, if you've got a country that is, got various different cultures bunching up into little cliques and living in their own separate communities and speaking their own separate languages, and divide and conquer, isn't it? It's a perfect system for any tyrannical form of government.
What you've just said, it's an observation. Of course, it's called racist, but like you didn't make it that way. You're just observing what is happening. And there's a famous quote by Ludwig von Mises, who was an Austrian economist, where he was referring to the failures of socialism, and he's like, "This is not the way that I want it, but it's the way that it is," which basically. You're being a realist. You're not a denialist.
I've always said that I don't have views. I mean, when you say you've got views and these are my views, you're suggesting that you're perceiving something as the way you want to see it, not the way it is. I don't have views. I'm just seeing things. I'm making observations and then explaining what my observations are. I mean, you might say, oh, that's your view. But this is not the way I want things to be. It's the way it is. Yeah.
No, like, for example, like, I wish that the Sudanese Australian community was able to harmoniously integrate. Like, I would love that, but that's not what's happening. And you've got to be a realist about how, using that particular example, obviously, the African youth crime wave has hit Melbourne in the last 2 summers, and there was, of course, the Security rally, because that was a crime hotspot. These are real crimes that are happening they're committed by real perpetrators with real people. It's what's happening. It's not made up.
No, and it's no coincidence or mistake either. It's part of a destabilization process. Like it's being done deliberately. It's not a mistake. This is what I can't stand hearing from people. They should be wiser than this. Regular people should know what's happening by now. Like, the government hasn't made a mistake when they legislated multiculturalism.
Well, you just read the legislation.
Yeah, they knew exactly what they were doing, and they wanted to bring it to this point. They wanted to create chaos, so out of that chaos, they can impose a more authoritarian system of government and do away, probably physically, with anyone who's going to oppose them. It's been planned for a very long time in advance. It's not like multiculturalism's not working in Australia or in any other European country or European extension colony, America, New Zealand, Canada. It's working exactly as they wanted it to. It's creating chaos, disharmony, and it's destabilizing your country so they can enforce their will absolutely on you. So you will ask for their help in the future. Things will be so bad that you will be ready to accept authoritarian government, and that's what they want.
Well, we've seen that with the radical left. Of course, I remember back in the Iraq War days, they hated government. They didn't want a surveillance state. But now I see prominent, well, so-called anarchist bloggers basically saying, we need more funding for ASIO to monitor far-right extremists. We need more censorship of the internet, basically saying, oh, please, we need more Big Brother.
Yeah, Big Daddy State. You know, it's...
And they've basically fallen for what you've just described, hook, line, and sinker, and they're not even aware of it.
Yeah, well, that actually, I think, links back into my point of classism before. Because if you're an independent, self-sufficient worker, you could never support any sort of big brother system of government because you can look after yourself and you don't need anything like that. But if you have gone to university and you've invested yourself emotionally and intellectually into all these ideas about equality and you know, social justice, or the Marxist version of social justice, then you're basically useless. You have no skill. You're wholly dependent on a social welfare state. So of course you're going to be calling for more government power against those troublesome Nazi workers that won't obey your will. So yeah, I think that's a class issue as well as a race issue.
I mentioned the 457 visas, which, well, basically because the government and society had told everyone to go to university, and of course there was the school shortage because the schools were demonized, as I said before. But we're also seeing, because, well, we were having 190,000 migrants coming into Australia a year, and it's been reduced to 160,000 per year, which is, well, if you work out the math there, that's a slight reduction. But of course the biggest opponents of that are the business community. It's not that there's not locals who are skilled for that, it's that they want that flexibility that to bring in whoever they want.
Yeah, there's a great deal of money being made through the current immigration system. You only need to look at the amount of houses, these cheap new homes that these developers are building, in thousands and thousands, tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of new homes. And Australian birth rates are so low that in the future, or even right now, who's going to buy those homes if we're not having children?
I was just driving past Cranbourne the other day, and I noticed they looked like the tiniest townhouses you could imagine.
They're almost touching.
Yes. And I was amazed at how small they were. And that's not like in the inner city where most people live in those tiny townhouses. That was in Cranbourne, where there's constant new land releases. And I was just...
All of these Indian, Pakistani, Arab, whatever they are, Chinese arrivals coming over and buying these homes, they're all moderately wealthy immigrants, and that's the point. That's what they want, because they want to sell these homes to someone, and that's who buys the homes. But they're all being tricked. They're being deluded into thinking that they can buy a nice piece of land in beautiful Australia and come over and live and start a new life and work and make a living for themselves and raise a nice family. They're not going to be able to do it, because the whole system's going to collapse in on itself. And there's not going to be a future for these Indians coming here and buying these cheap new homes. But they're tricked. There's ambassadors for these developers over in India setting up big stalls and banners trying to encourage Indians to immigrate into Australia to buy their cheap homes. And immigrants immigrants get tricked into doing it, thinking there's a bright new future ahead in Australia, when all there is chaos and communism.
Well, it's still the government that builds the roads and other infrastructure and public transport, and governments are pretty crap at doing those things. I mean, a lot of these road projects, they become political wedge issues during the election. For example, Daniel Andrews, he ran on a platform of tearing up the East-West Link contract, a road that we still need. Mm-hmm. He won the election, so he tore that up, cost roughly the Victorian taxpayer $1 billion not to build a road. That is a piece of infrastructure we needed if we're having all these new migrants in. And that we haven't had starting to get train network upgrades. But it's not keeping up, and obviously the government hasn't thought this through. Obviously, the federal government, they decide immigration policy, but it's the states that they have to build all the infrastructure, and combine that with natural government incompetence.
But the state still has to find contractors to build all that infrastructure. The state doesn't have any builders on its payroll.
Yes,
directly.
And obviously Daniel Andrews, he's quite chummy with the unions, and we're seeing all these cost blowouts with the Westgate Tunnel, the Metro Tunnel, and so it's great this is being built, but it's being built at such a great expense. And that's another aspect where if you can build all these houses and all these people can live there, but how are they going to get from A to B?
It's already chaos. It's so chaotic in and around Melbourne. What used to be a 45-minute drive is now 2 hours, and it's in such poor traffic conditions. It's almost Little China. But Daniel Andrews, I don't think he knows what he's doing. And my prediction is that there's going to be a major disaster or collapse of some sort during the development of all of this infrastructure, because all of the engineers are shit. Most of these engineers are recently arrived immigrants who have come overseas to Australia to study, and have ended up on permanent working visas or something. In Frankston, where I'm from, they dug up all of the roads around the train station and re-poured all of them to do up the train station area and built a new bridge and all of that.
Oh yes, I've seen that myself. And basically, they've rebuilt the train station, I'd say 3 or 4 times, and it hasn't changed at all. There's still the same 2 platforms.
But they dug up all the roads, poured the gutters. Now it's a train station, right? So what's common around train stations? Buses. They poured the gutters and then opened it all up and said, we're ready to go. The roads weren't wide enough for buses to drive down. So they had to dig up all of the gutters and re-pour the roads to fit buses.
Yeah, because they've all got to go the buses down further where Blockbuster Video used to be.
Not a single one of these engineers, while rebuilding this whole train station and road infrastructure, thought, what about buses? Like, they built it first and then it was too small for buses, so they pulled it apart and built it again at the expense of the taxpayer so buses would fit. And that just goes to show the degree of competence in these so-called new age engineers are capable of. So it's my prediction that there's going to be a disaster of some sort. It could be on the train line. It could be a big building in the city. Something's going to fall down, and that's just a prediction of mine. It may come to pass. It may not. But if it does, remember that I said it.
Well, it was revealed that Daniel Andrews has not revealed which of the fire danger areas this summer, and there's also the cladding crisis with the new apartments. They've been kept secret, so people don't know if they're living in a apartment building that's going to move, because they don't want to cause a mass panic. So if you live in one of these apartment towers, you could be in one that basically could slant one way.
Well, they're all built as cheaply as they possibly could be, with all the most cheap materials and to the most minimum of standards to pass as a building, or a building that's passable by engineering or structural standards. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if there is some major disaster involving a building or partial building collapse in the next few years in and around Melbourne.
Now, I want to use the next section of the show to sort of pick your brains about the nationalist resurgence that we've seen over in the United States and in the United Kingdom, because, well, they've tried to do mainly to you, but break the nationalist movement in Australia, because obviously the United Patriots Front, you were able to get all those people to the rallies because of Facebook, and then Facebook pulled the plug. If that United Patriots Front page had been, if it was still up to date, it'd probably be over 1 million people.
Yeah, if my Facebook page was never closed down, it would be one of the most popular in the world, I think, because it grew at a phenomenal rate, probably faster than I've ever seen it, with the exception of Milo Yiannopoulos. He grew probably a bit faster than us, but we were up there. We were one of the first in the world at the time to be utilizing Facebook, and I think as a result, we were one of the first to be banned as well in 2016.
Well, you mentioned Milo Yiannopoulos there, and I'll throw in Gavin McGuinness. They were banned from Twitter and Facebook, even though they were at pains to say we're not racist, we don't have bigoted views. It didn't save them in the end. Their optics didn't save them. They still got deplatformed, and they both got banned from touring Australia. And I remember people saying, because Milo at one point, he talked about how this deplatforming had really damaged basically what is his career now. And Tommy Robinson, he had over 1 million Facebook followers, and he said that because he ran for European Parliament, it basically, because he didn't have Facebook anymore, that damaged his campaign. And I remember all these leftists saying, see, deplatforming does work. We've managed to basically make it so that United Patriots Front, they can only get 20 people to their rally. Gavin and Milo, nobody hears from them anymore. And Tommy Robinson, well, it's also because he's always in and out of court on various things, and obviously he was in prison for 2 stints for live streaming outside of that Muslim gang grooming trial. But they didn't realize that these deplatformers, all they were really doing was playing a game of whack-a-mole. They did it to you, like Milo, Gavin. They didn't think that another one would pop up, and that's what we've seen over the United States with the Groyper army, with Nick Fuentes, who hosts the America First YouTube channel. Because what's happened over there is because Trump in 2016, the Republican establishment hated him. They were at first stop Trump, then they were never Trumpers. But now that Trump has proven to be a winner and has won over the Republican base, they've basically reinvented themselves as the Trump Republican Party. We've seen Ben Shapiro, who didn't even vote for Trump. His Daily Wire is supposed to be the voice of Trump now. The National Review magazine, they've fallen into line. And obviously the most prominent Trump Republican organization has been Turning Point USA, which is a student group. Charlie Kirk, he said at the time in 2016 that he reluctantly supported Trump. And basically the Turning Point USA has tried to say, oh, we're not like the left, which is being hate-filled now. We love everyone. Like we're basically what the left was 15 years ago. And because so they basically thought they had a free run with the young conservative movement. But then, of course, the next generation, where Generation Y or Millennials, Generation Z, it's been talked about that they're much more conservative. And this is why I say whack-a-mole, because they might have whacked a few of these new conservatives, or was it alt-right or new right, whatever you want to call them, but they've tried to do platform online. But Turning Point USA, they had this culture war tour, and what's termed the Groyper Army, they pretty much asked Charlie Kirk and his guests 3 simple questions about, if you're America first, how come you don't support, how come you support foreign wars, dual allegiance, how come you still support mass legal immigration, and why are you embracing all this social degeneracy, and are you really for free speech? And it's basically the whole culture war tour was a disaster, and Charlie Kirk was more comfortable fielding questions from the socialists because they're easy. Like, if you don't know now that socialism sucks and that the left, they're feral, that's basically 4 years ago, and it's been described by somebody as basic bitch conservatism.
Yeah. Well, I haven't really been following what's happening in America. I only recently heard about the Groypers. I'm afraid to say I don't know who Nick Fuentes is. That how you say it?
Fuentes, yes.
Fuentes. I don't know who he is. When you get censored from all social media, it's harder to follow what's going on. I mostly get most of my news through Gab. But
You've
that's,
still got a YouTube account, don't you?
I can't access it anymore.
Oh, you can't?
Yeah, well, it's got something to do with I can't verify my emails. They won't let me verify it for some reason, but I don't know the ins and outs of it. For the last 6 months or even longer, I've been working a lot to try to catch up on all the money that I spent on first politics and then on my court case. So, yeah, I haven't really been following what's going on overseas. I try to keep my understanding of political events local. So I check out what's happening in Australia and that. But anyone who knows me or has known me from the start will know that I've been quiet for the past 6 months or so. But yeah, I don't understand this whole conservative thing. Like, what is a conservative anyway? What are they even trying to conserve?
That's the point that they're making. They're asking Charlie Kirk, what have you conserved?
Yeah.
Because Nick Fuentes makes the point, you're basically now what the left was 15 years ago.
Yeah, well, I think perhaps it's a process. They say that everything ebbs and flows and nothing changes, and maybe they've assumed that position now. But if that's so, then what's happened to the actual left? What's become of them?
Well, it seems that, and this is the point that Nick Fuentes has made, the Overton window has moved, the left has become more radical, and it seems that who were the right have just become what the left was 15 years ago.
Yeah, okay. Well, yeah. I've never been a big fan of the political spectrum and the various identities that people choose to take on.
Oh, that's a basic understanding. But
Yeah.
the other thing I wanted to talk about, how obviously we've talked about you're banned from mainstream media, even by conservatives won't interview you. For example, after the night after you were interviewed by Adam Giles,
Yeah.
Andrew Bolt posted a no to Cottrell on his blog.
Yeah, probably at the instruction of whoever tells him what he can and can't say.
But Andrew Bolt had no qualms about interviewing, who was it, Jacob Antruora, who was one of the socialist organisers of the mining conference Blockade.
Yeah.
And of course he got destroyed easily. And the reason why I bring that up is because the reason why Charlie Kirk and that, they like getting questions from the socialists because they're easy to debunk, but what the Groypers and what I think conservatives in Australia are afraid if they do interview and challenge you is that they might get flustered and they might not have the answer.
Yeah, well, that's so often the case, isn't it? And I've been blacklisted by a lot of different, a variety of different people, even academics. This happened recently. A feminist academic from some university, maybe it was La Trobe, I can't remember. She got my phone number from a colleague, called me and said, hey, I'm doing this gender studies thing and I want to ask you some questions about gender relations. I'm a feminist, just so you know. And I was like, yeah, cool, I'll do it if you'd like. You're the first person to contact me in a long time because no one's allowed to interview me anymore. And she's like, oh, I don't care about that. I just want to be fair. The next day she contacted me and said, oh, look, I'm really sorry about this. She was going to come out, drive down to where I live and interview me at the expense of the university. She goes, she said, I'm having problems with the Central Ethics Committee. They don't want me to interview you. So I think I'm going to try and fight it though. And I said to her, you know what? Don't bother. I said, because anybody doing truly objective research or study in the academic realm isn't going to last long in that realm. And she didn't write back to me after that. So, and before that, after the Brenton Tarrant the shooting in what was it, New Zealand?
Christchurch, New Zealand.
Christchurch, yeah. After he shot those Muslims, I had a Channel 7 journalist, and I forget his name, but he contacted me, and he contacted you too. He said he was coming down and he wanted to interview people. Specifically, he wanted to interview me because he said to me on the phone that he had seen other journalists and media corporations trying to create this link between me and Brenton Tarrant, but it wasn't based on anything credible. And he wanted to give me the opportunity to respond. And I was surprised, especially after Adam Giles got sacked, for giving me the opportunity to say anything at all. He didn't just want that. He said, I want to see what you do in your life. He said, I want to come to work with you. I want to see what you do in your free time. I want to see where you live, because the picture that's been presented or created by the media of you is that you're some horrible, evil Nazi villain. But I want to see who you really are. And I said to him, you're going to get in trouble for this. And he said, oh, it'll be right. And that was the same attitude Adam Giles had. Before I went on to Adam Giles's program, I said, you're going to cop some flack for having me on. And he said, oh, it'll be right. I get flack all the time. And I'm like, all right. And, he ended up getting suspended just for interviewing me. But anyway, this Channel 7 journalist that planned all this out, and he didn't just contact me, he contacted a number of different people around me and you guys as well. He called me the next day and said, sorry, don't worry about it. So obviously the same thing happened. Some centralized board of controllers or editors, they might all link back into the same network, says no. If you're thinking about interviewing Blair Cottrell or someone like Blair Cottrell, someone like me, don't do it. Don't give them the chance, because we just don't know how it'll go.
Now, I haven't forgotten about your super chats in entropy. We're going to go through them at the end of the show because I don't want to interrupt the flow of the discussion. And just a warning, I will have to, I'd say, reinterpret some of these super chats so that they sort of fit within what YouTube allows.
Mm-hmm.
But I've put the entropy link again, so we'll go through those at the end of the show. But going back to the main reason they give to deplatforming is you're a Nazi, and that to give you a platform promotes your ideas. But the Nazi Germany overall, including World War II, the death toll was 17 million, where communism, and again, all the socialists at the mining blockade, they were all interviewed. Communism, Marxism, socialism's killed 100 million in the 20th century. Its death toll is higher. So you should be deplatforming these socialists more, because their ideology has killed more people.
Yeah, but the Germans killed people, specifically Jewish people, by turning them into soap and lampshades. And that's a lot more evil than deliberately starving 100 million people to death. And so that justifies my deplatforming, clearly, Tim. Keep up, mate.
Well, it's because the communists had good intentions, that they didn't mean to. It was just
so when they stole food and resources from farmers and starved people to the point of cannibalism, where children were being pinched and eaten by peasants, that was all well intended. It was all good intentions. It was all supposed to be for the greater good, so it's okay. Yeah, great. I know you're being sarcastic. I'm just trying to.
Now, on that theme there, the ABC still blamed in 2016 for giving you a platform on Hack Live. Tom Tilley, he's the host of Hack.
He's actually a funny guy. He's a good ABC bureaucrat. He does what he's told. But
do you know that he's been replaced now by, I think she looks sort of like an Indian woman. He's stepped down.
Stepped down?
Yeah.
They got rid of him?
Oh, well, he says he's stepping down.
Oh, I reckon maybe because he got trolled. someone called in and pretended to be a Jewish professor or something, and said that white people basically don't deserve to live, and them being bred out by multiculturalism is social justice. And Tom Tilley said, but don't white people deserve an existence, or something like that. But then he realized he was being trolled, and so he hung up. But I think that might have contributed to his stepping down, which may not have been entirely voluntary.
So this is a still from Hack Live. That's, yeah, you can see Tom Tilley there. So he's still white, and he's got, well, is that sort of what's termed a fash haircut?
I don't know. Well, he's pretty ubermensch, if you want my opinion. Like, good looking dude. His hair's almost as blonde as mine, so he could even be a Nazi from the look of him. Yeah.
And that's you on the left there, and that's on the right there is
Narika Guri, I think.
Yeah, Narika Guri.
She's now a man, or maybe gender neutral.
Well, I've got their biography now. Because they were on the recent Broadside feminist panel. It was interesting that it's supposed to be a feminist panel, but they had someone who is not a woman.
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know how the feminists feel about that.
So this is their biography. Naoka Gori is a Kuri Guri Gunjamiri and Wujuri and Yuru writer. Guri work explores black, queer and feminist politics. They wrote and performed in season 3 of Black Comedy. In 2018, they were named the Wheeler Centre Next Chapter recipient and are currently working on a book of essays. Now, on that ABC Feminist Broadside panel, everyone said that the ABC, they're using taxpayers' money to have this feminist panel promote violence, but everyone did not pick up that the Broadside Festival, it's funded by City of Melbourne, Victorian government's arts program, the federal government's arts program. Everyone forgot that. They just focused on the ABC aspect.
Yeah.
And the whole festival, like, even if the ABC didn't do that, it was still pretty much government funded.
Well, sometimes these corporations act as kind of like a shield for who's really responsible, because you don't blame anyone with a name. Whenever something goes wrong, you blame ABC. But ABC isn't a person. It's a front group, you see, so it acts as kind of like a protective barrier for the people who are really responsible for the damage done to this country.
And, of course, the most controversial panelist, I should say that Naoka, she was the one who said that, we've tried to reason with our oppressor, but it hasn't worked, so let's just burn things. And, of course, the irony is that they've got a platform on a national broadcast network to claim that they're oppressed. And they were on a show with you 3 years ago. You've been banned from all mainstream media, yet they are on getting a platform on national TV 3 years later saying, I'm so oppressed that we probably need to burn things.
Yeah, I don't know, I didn't see that.
Yeah, but you get what
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah. So this was, most controversial panelist, Mona Ethaway. She was born in Egypt. She is a woman.
Yeah.
But of course is an American citizen now.
Yeah.
Yes. Imagine if we declared war. Imagine if we fuck this shit snapped en masse and systematically killed men for no reason at all other than being men. Imagine an underground movement called Fuck the Patriarchy, which would claim responsibility and warn it was putting the world on notice, and it will keep killing more and more men until the patriarchy sends a representative to talk. How many men do you think must be killed before patriarchy begins to be dismantled? 1,000, 10,000, 1 million. It is barbaric, it is savage. Many millions of men have killed in wars begun by men against other men. Imagine this declaration of war against patriarchy. Now, this was not some thought bubble or heat of the moment thing she came up with. She wrote this in a book, The 7 Deadly Sins for Women and Girls. And the ABC, they knew that that was in her book before they invited her on. And she was still granted a visa by Home Affairs Department, by Peter Dutton or David Coleman, who makes the decision now. But of course, Milo and Gavin were too extreme, even though it's written that she proposes maybe we kill 1 million men.
And what are those million men going to do? Just stand there and willingly be killed? I mean, every action produces an equal and opposite reaction. I can imagine they would probably fight back. But, you know, in the brains of women, the world behaves differently.
That's what some people use to justify the program. Obviously, she wouldn't really do that. Well, she's probably not capable of that. I know there was some ABC presenter, Raphael Epstein, who said, I can't believe what was the big deal about that. And when she said on the show, Mona Ethaway, that perhaps we needed to kill 1 million rapists, Fran Kelly, who was the host, said, them fighting words, oh, you're calling for violence, or the Conservatives in the Spectator magazine, they've written some bad things about that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's what am I supposed to say? Like, yeah, I'm surprised that they. What do they do? Do they take down the show that she was on or something?
Yes, well, they have a investigation into it.
Which means nothing.
Yes,
yeah.
but I'll just go to one of your old tweets, because apparently this scared a lot of people. Don't tell me to be careful about what I say. If I'm ever in an inappropriate position of power, I'll deport the enemies of my country and execute those who refuse to go. Laugh if you want, but when the time comes, I will campaign with that as my slogan and I will win. And I recall it went into circulation after your Sky News interview, and a lot of the reaction was, oh God, he's saying such threatening language.
Well, I was probably at gym or just finished gym and was feeling pretty good, pretty pumped up or something. I don't know. I can't remember when I tweeted that. It might have been in response to something somebody else said. It might have been a passing thought just to stir up some of my opposition. I don't know. I said a lot of abrasive things just to increase my reach at the time.
But you didn't write in a 300-page book which got published by a major publishing house.
No, I didn't. Well,
Mona did.
Yeah, well, yeah. I'm not a woman born in Egypt, so I don't have the privilege of being able to openly say that I'm going to murder people and then appear on television and not be questioned about it.
Now, the one last topic that I've got, because we talked about what's happening in the USA with the Groper War, but obviously Tommy Robinson was the face of nationalism for many, well, pretty much this decade in the UK. But of course, he's been bogged down with legal battles, and obviously he has been hesitant to talk about mass immigration. His focus has only been on Islam, and he works with a variety of different diverse communities who have been affected by Islam. The English Defence League that he had, it had a Sikh division, a Jewish division, an LGBT division. It had basically everyone who the Muslims didn't like.
Yeah, well, his choice of diverse friends and failure to focus on the core of the problem and the real driving force of the problem certainly didn't keep him out of jail, did it?
No, again, the optics, they don't save you, as they say. But he's basically been, because he is basically bogged down in legal and he's got a family that he needs to take care of, he's basically been replaced by what you call a blast from the past, Mark Collett, who was the youth leader of the British National Party, which was quite successful in the 2000s. They got 2 MEPs elected in 2009. Nick Griffin was their leader for many years, and during the summer of 2002 he was featured on 2 documentaries, Channel 4 Young Nazi and Proud, where they actually they secretly recorded him. Like, they obviously, like, the producer tricked him to say, oh, we're filming now, we're not filming now.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, and he also was on, Russell Brand did this documentary series in 2002. Yeah, so which was called Nazi Boy. And of course, Russell Brand tries to be sort of, oh, I can't be neutral with these Nazis, they're just so horrible. And of course, it came out later that during the filming of that doco-series, that was when Russell Brand was addicted to heroin, alcohol, and sex.
What do you mean, when he was addicted to those things?
Oh, well, nobody knew that at the time.
Yeah, well, I remember seeing his book at that Oliver's health food place, Revolution. You know, the rich Russell Brand who drives around in his private jets talking about revolution that never happened. I don't know. I don't know what to say about that. I think Russell Brand's a good laugh, but that's about it.
But the theme of those shows in the summer of 2002, how can you say that white people are being replaced and be so racist? They're saying, what you're saying is absurd.
Well, they're 6% of the world population.
Yes, but 17 years later, everything you said back then, he's been proven right.
Yeah, that's well, what? But you know, what are you going to do to hold all these people to account who rejected his proposals back then? But I don't know. As things progress, like, the people who are considered more extreme for telling the truth are obviously going to be mainstreamed because the truth is undeniable. So that's what's happening now, I suppose, with these former neo-Nazis and far-right figures who turned out to be extremely right about what they said 10, 15 years ago.
Well, he was 22 at the time. He was just graduating from university, and I thought it was interesting that the documentary maker interviewed Mark's parents, who they were proud parents, and he was trying. The documentary maker failed to sort of like, don't you know your son's a horrible racist Nazi?
Yeah.
And they just like saw right through it, his parents.
Yeah.
Which if and also what was the focus of the documentary? It's like, oh, how you gonna find a girl who shares your political beliefs? And then later on,
believe
it's like,
me, it's no problem.
And it's like, Mark's girlfriend broke up with him because of his. And they asked him, oh, what's more important to you, like a girlfriend or your activism? Like that was sort of.
Yeah. Poor Mark, you know. I'm sure he's had a lot of trouble finding a girlfriend.
Well, that was 17 years ago. Mark is now married. He's got a young daughter. Obviously, he's much older and wiser now. He still pretty much looks the same now, 39, that he did 22 years ago, because back then he was a personal fitness and health, and so.
Oh, imagine that! It's almost like that's like related to the philosophy that he takes on.
If you look, obviously. Like, you can sort of see in Mark's face that sort of a few sort of wrinkles in that, but he's still, like, for his age.
Yeah.
But obviously the British National Party, they went through an implosion. So he's started it's a lobby group, Patriotic Alternative. And I'm not sure if you've heard Mark Collett speak, but he's extremely articulate. He doesn't like the sort of, this could be a dig at somebody else, the sort of street brawler, hooligan aspect that has been... had a sort of dominated nationalist things, and he doesn't he's not saying sort of you need to be sort of posh but just be professional.
The problem is, like, street brawling was never really a dominant aspect of nationalism. It was that perception was created by the media. I mean, like, if there was ever a brawl or any physical altercation, it lasted for about 4 or 5 seconds. And it was provoked by so-called anti-fascists or communist agitators. The media took that 5 seconds of footage and made it look like that was the whole demonstration. And you know that for a fact, just as well as I do. So really the whole street brawling aspect of nationalism was never really a thing. It was just made to seem as though it was a thing. And unfortunately, a lot of people on the same side as us often fall for that perception. Yeah.
And when Mark was youth leader of the British National Party, that was the era before Facebook, and so you had to do, back in those days, even though the internet was around, the letterboxing, the door knocking, get your message out. So he knows, because of his age, how to get the message out before big tech deplatforming. Because obviously, when the United Patriots Front, it was a whirlwind thing that it just grew so rapidly, and obviously on Facebook, because that's what our generation came accustomed to. You just promote things on Facebook, but of course then Facebook yoink. But because Mark is a bit older, he knows, because back in
wisdom of experience.
Yeah, and like it shows in that documentary, like he and the British National Party ran around door knocking, leafleting. That's what you got to do to win elections, campaign your socks off, and they did get results regardless of what you think of the British National Party. Like Mark back then was a young campaigner, know what to do. So he's certainly an authoritative voice, I would say.
Yeah, definitely be someone interesting to talk to. Yeah.
And he's got his weekly show, Patriotic Review Weekly, where he talks to other nationalists from Europe and around the world. And I would say certainly that if you sort of want to move the Overton window in the direction it should go, Mark is the person to do that, rather than somebody like Charlie Kirk, for example.
So I just saw in the comments, someone's accusing me of wearing a wig. No wig, mate. Look at that. That's all me.
So that's all the topics that I've got. We've covered quite a bit, so we might we'll finish at 10 p.m. Melbourne time, so we'll just go through these super chats and questions. I'll put through the entropy link again, and I'll interpret these questions the best I could. So I'll go back to the first one here. Senator Slayer has sent through $3. Thank you. Blair, what do you think about Peter Grace admitting to him pissing his pants, do you think he needs Depends?
I don't know who Peter Grace is, so sorry.
Maddie's Modern Life has sent through $5 Canadian. So much anti-Semitism in this stream. Diversity is our strength. Worship our leaders and God bless Israel.
Who said that? Sorry.
Maddie's Modern Life.
Yeah, it sounds sarcastic. Okay, is that a question? Sorry.
Oh no,
It's more of a
because
statement.
if the questions in the question section, I'll explain how entropy works. The question is for actual questions, while the super chats, you just read out what they've written within the community guidelines.
Yeah.
So they all get read out the donations. But if it's not a question in the question, then I don't read it out.
Okay, yeah.
But we're doing the super chats first.
Okay.
Senator Slayer has also sent through another $3 said, Blair, have you ever seen Israelis dancing? I've heard they're very good dancers. Google dancing Israelis and see for yourself.
I think Google's already whitewashed that. But
Yeah.
I'm surprised the Senator Slayer has any money to donate to this, to be honest. But, you know, he's popping out kids left, right and centre. But, yeah, I have seen the dancing Israelis. They seemed overjoyed at the tragedy of 9/11.
But on that Google point, that Google is now... You shouldn't do Google for actual research now. Google is only good for Googling what is fake news.
Yeah.
So basically, if I want to know what basically the fake news about is the Trump impeachment, for example, you just Google Trump impeachment and see what it comes up with, of course, CNN, New York Times, Washington Post.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
We've got some questions here. Senator Slayer's got another one. Was Hando right?
Who's Hando?
Hando was the Russell Crowe character in Romper Stomper, the original one.
Oh, God, isn't that Hollywood propaganda, that stuff?
Well, it was an Australian movie, but Hando, because I saw that movie before I watched the Romper Stomper miniseries, that Hando was just a psycho and...
I know what he's talking about. The original Romper Stomper film.
Yeah.
No, I don't know. I'm not a big, skinhead fan, so I don't know what to say. I don't really remember the movie, to be honest.
He targets the Vietnamese restaurant owners, which of course you saw at the Security rally. The Vietnamese shopkeepers,
He's not right into it. Well, look, what do I say about multiculturalism? I say is like a virus or a disease, right? It's got a cause and then it's got symptoms. And when you've got a disease or a virus, are you going to cure it by fighting the symptoms or the cause? So yeah, obviously no, Hando wasn't fucking right.
Yeah, and the point that I was getting at is that Vietnamese shopkeepers, they were fighting the...
Yeah, they showed up to our rally.
Yeah, because they were fighting the...
African crime.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we've got Port Film Copper said, what's with the new mod? It's become East Germany all of a sudden. I've replaced the mod with somebody else, but I've been told that... We shall see what's made of the live chat.
All right, let's do it.
First Spirit. They didn't really let Blair speak on Hack Live back then. Now that he's currently on a respectable platform, I hope that means WilmsFront. What are some of the things Blair wished to share back then that he wasn't really able to? Well, it was 3 years ago.
Yeah, it was a while ago. Well, first of all, it was all set up against me, obviously, and I kind of felt bad for some of the other people on the panel because it seemed to be all centralized around attacking me, and it really wasn't an open discussion. It did involve other people to a degree, but the majority of the show was just all about having a dig at me.
I noticed there was one girl on the panel, Lara Joffrey. She was described as conservative libertarian. She didn't say anything.
Yeah, she barely got anything in, and I felt really bad for her because she was a really nice girl. I spoke to her beforehand, and the army guy who was like, they tried to find someone from somewhere you would expect would be like more patriotic or more right wing in essence, to use an understandable term. They tried to find, a soldier from the army, but he was actually a leftist with leftist views, believed in equality and all that stuff. And I suppose that was supposed to bedazzle me or something, but really didn't bother me that much. But beforehand, he was talking to me and not really... he was talking to me in the studio or the studio cafeteria where you have your coffees and stuff. And he was acting like he was all for me, and he was shaking my hand and stuff. So it was almost like it was set up to confuse me. And then, but afterwards, he apologized to me because I went to the pub with all those guys afterwards, and I had a couple of, I don't drink, so I had a couple of waters while they had their beers. I spoke to Narika Guri, the genderless Aboriginal, now genderless. She wasn't genderless at the time. And she was arguing with me about why women shouldn't be able to just have sex with whoever they want, whenever they want. And and I was basically saying, well, I think that's probably a poor decision for your mental, physical, and spiritual health. But anyway, that army guy apologized to me at the pub and said, hey, look, sorry about going so hard on you. You're actually a nice guy, and blah, blah, blah. So personally, on a personal level, all those people, with the exception of the token, chosen night professor, they were all nice people. Like on a personal level, obviously Narika Guri had her issues, but I don't think I could honestly say that I hated any of them. Like, probably don't hate anyone, but yeah, it wasn't as hostile from a personal engagement perspective as it probably seemed on TV. Like, I was quite comfortable with all these people, and I didn't really dislike any of them. So.
I recall at the time because it was called Hack Live, and then Tom Tilley says that, oh, we're on a delay, and then you arced up and it's like, what do you mean it's not live?
I was never told up until, like, I agreed to be on it if it would be live, and that was one of my conditions. And then they told me as it was opening that it wasn't live, it was going to be on a delay. And I almost decided to walk off because I was convinced they were going to chop it up, but they didn't do that. So I'm glad I stayed on it, I suppose.
Well, because they did, the other Hack Live they did was, is male privilege bullshit? And they had, the main battle was Clementine Ford against Daisy Cousins. And, the delay came in handy when Clementine Ford said the C word, and it was they managed to bleep it out as it was going to air.
She's got a lot of feelings, Clementine Ford. At the St Kilda rally earlier this year, it's the first time I've ever happened upon her in person. I didn't notice her. I was walking with a colleague, and she had a couple of colleagues with her, and we crossed paths, and she said, "Fuck you, Blair, you fucking Nazi." And I said, "Oh, Clementine, you're smaller than I thought you were." She's very short in person, and that was my first engagement with her, and I realized that this is a woman who has a lot to deal with emotionally.
Well, she is a mother now to a son, and it's interesting how it's changed her outlook quite a bit. Obviously, she still is quite a radical feminist, but she's become a loving mother to her son, which...
Ostensibly.
Yes.
Who knows what goes on behind closed doors?
Oh, well, I believe about what she writes about caring for her son.
Yeah, well, I'd want to believe it too, but, I hope that in the future we don't hear the opposite coming from the mouth of us.
So we've got 5 minutes to go. Port Film Co-op, hi Blair. What are your favourite Jean-Claude Van Damme movies? They are often good, heroic macho stories from a pre-woke era.
Jean-Claude Van Damme, all I remember is kicking, a great deal of face kicks and roundhouse kicks and
yes, that is.
Really impossible triple kicks and stuff like that. I don't know, I don't really have a Van Damme favourite. I wasn't a huge fan.
Did you see The Joker? Because that apparently...
I haven't seen it yet. I was supposed to see it with a friend, but it never happened.
You should see it because, I think the Guardian and the woke media, it's failed when they've said don't see this movie because you could get shot up by an incel at the cinema.
Yeah, well, that could happen anywhere.
But I did a review of the Joker, and basically I can understand why they didn't want people to see it, because I bought my tickets from it was just this young girl in the box office, and she said how great the movie was, and it's not. That's what they're worried about. Just a normal, young working class girl like her seeing that movie and thinking that it's great cinema.
Yeah.
Which it basically is the elites exposed, because what's portrayed in the movie is an actual working class revolution. It's called the Joker Revolution.
Okay.
That's what an actual working class, because you have because I won't go into it too detail, but as Thomas Wayne, he's portrayed as being really scornish of the working class, saying they should vote for me because I know what's good for them.
Yeah, well, that's basically the attitude of our so-called academic class left.
We've got Maddie here. Tim, why did you not read out my full super chat? Well, you know as well as I do, Maddie, about YouTube's community standards, and I know that's why that you make a few of your videos BitChute exclusive, so don't play censor with me. And with regard to your other question, well, obviously, like, I just baked one birthday cake. That's all I know about your other question. And we've got Peter V here. Blair, how do we contribute to your court case? Is that a question that you want to answer?
Well, it's basically done for now, and I've paid everything I needed to pay. So, yeah, you don't really need to. I appreciate it, but yeah, at this stage, yeah, I'm just waiting for a verdict from the judge. So,
probably if you opened up, say, if like you had a PO box where people could send in cash under 10,000, of course, they'd probably shut down the PO box.
I don't think it's illegal. I think it's illegal to send cash by mail, any amount.
Or what about all those birthday cards that Grandma used to send with $20 in them?
I think they just overlooked them out of good graces. Yeah, but I think it is illegal to send cash by mail.
Yeah. Oh, well, they need to start locking up all those old grandmas now.
Yeah, maybe.
Oh, that's all. Everyone speak now or forever hold your peace. But yeah, well, thank you for your time, Blair. We've gone for what, nearly 2 hours.
Yeah, I'm feeling it.
Yeah.
I'm not good at sitting still, so I'm doing my best. But yeah.
But yes, well, we've reached 30, but we're both still young.
Yeah.
And well, we'll probably see the world change in the next 10 years.
A good friend of mine from Sydney, she says that she thinks next year is going to be pretty hardcore. Next year is going to be very interesting. So, you know.
Well, we've got the British election at the end of this year. Then we've got, of course, the Democrat primaries and Trump's re-election. Well, he's going through the impeachment process. And well, they used to say that Trump would be a fascist president, but it's a weird fascist president where, because they said that he was going to lock up dissidents, but it's the deep state, they've locked up all his friends. Paul Manafort, his campaign manager, his confidant Roger Stone will probably go to jail. His lawyer Michael Cohen, he's looking like he's going to jail. His national security advisor Michael Flynn. How are you a fascist if the deep state is locking up all your friends?
Yeah, well, I don't think people who use the word fascist actually understand what the real meaning of it is. As described by Mussolini, it's a union of corporate and state power.
Yes.
Which is exactly the sort of power that supports the people calling it fascist.
Yeah, it's what we have now when you have basically the state in a lot of ways with their sort of licensing that they have.
Yeah.
That is a form of fascism, what you would define as...
Yeah, but like in the brains of what are essentially children, fascist means Nazi, means racist, means white male. So why complicate things? Yeah.
Well, it's worth, even if you repeat yourself, what is the actual definition of fascism. If you want to know more detail, I'd recommend Paul Godfrey's book on fascism. He's also written a book on the neoconservatives as well, who of course say that they're the real conservatives, where he basically talks about how the neoconservatives were basically New York liberals who appropriated conservatism.
Yeah.
But that's it for this Sunday night show. Thank you everyone for watching, and thank you to all of those who sent through super chats. There is one more. Maddie, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to shut this channel down as a form of sabotage? And we've got Jason, was it Kotogoba, Blair. Have the Lads Society guys reacted to your case?
Lads Society guys. I don't know if they've reacted, but I know a few of them showed up. The leader showed up, Tommy Sewell, to support me on one of the days. I'm not sure what they're doing at the moment. Best way to find out would be to get in contact with them directly.
And of course, the Australian alt media lineup continues tomorrow night. XYZ Live with Maddie Rose and David Hiscock on the Maddie Rose live channel. That's at 9 p.m. Melbourne time. I recommend that you troll Maddie in the Entropy Super Chat, see what he is willing to read out, given that he wants me to read out a lot of things. And then, of course, Tuesday, I have Trans-Tasman Talk, 7 p.m. Melbourne time, with my New Zealand counterpart, the editor of Right Minds, Dewey de Boer. And then, of course, Wednesday night is when WilmsFront will be on next, 7 p.m. Melbourne time on this channel. Make sure if you haven't yet, you're subscribed. Click the bell to allow notifications. Give all of these episodes thumbs up, comment below, and share, because we know that YouTube and Google, they try to manipulate the results as much as possible. And then, of course, Uncockables every Thursday, 8:30 p.m. on that channel. And then, of course, most weekday mornings, Detonation, hosted by my colleague Steel Archer, live episodes. You can catch those on the dedicated Detonation YouTube channel. And, of course, his website, steelarcher.com. There's new episodes of The Report from Tiger Mountain with Richard Wollstonecroft on the Unshackled YouTube channel. We have had moderating tonight, despite many objections. Dear Beltran in the live chat. Her weekly live stream is on her own channel, 8:30 p.m. Melbourne time, and of course she uploads vlogs and commentary videos at other intervals. And of course, if you want to support The Unshackled on a more regular basis, you can go to theunshackled.net/membership or theunshackled.net/donate. We're also on Subscribestar, Patreon and PayPal for now. And of course, Rational Rise TV, that's where XYZ Unshackled content and Rational Rise content. There's also Dusty Bogan and D. Beltran have been added to it. That's if YouTube ever pulls the plug. That's where you'll be able to find our content, because there's been many casualties on YouTube. We've seen Australian Meditations, his channel go. Sherman Burgess, his channel has gone. I'm trying to remember who else has had their channel terminated. But yes, it can occur at any time, and YouTube has got new terms and conditions coming out in December, where if they deem your channel not commercially viable, they can shut it down based on their sole discretion. So it's their sole discretion. So if you're just doing, say, a channel to upload, I don't know, you patting your dog, for example, obviously that's not going to make much money, but YouTube might come to the judgment that might be commercially viable.
Unviable, you mean?
No, because they might deem political commentary channels as commercially unviable. It's their interpretation. You get what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's their discretion.
Well, it's the same as Facebook.
Yes.
But, at least is YouTube actually giving you access to what their terms and conditions are? Like, can you read it?
Yes. You can read it.
Well, that's different from... no, maybe Facebook's got that now too. Back when I got banned from Facebook, you couldn't read their terms and conditions. They would just say, you're banned for violating our terms and conditions. And you'll be like, well, what terms and conditions exactly have I violated? And they wouldn't tell you, and you couldn't read them. So that was basically an at their discretion thing. But, God, if you were running a platform like that, a network like that,
And I noticed that the live chat was trying to do a trick on me, that they've alleged that Dia was censoring all of the chats. No, because it was basically these people have written, because I can tell now which messages are actually deleted and which ones are actually they've written message deleted, because I don't think YouTube has a, what do you call it, a message deleted by Dia, message reinstated by Margot.
They're just hanging up on it.
Yeah. So I figured that out. But yes, that's all for tonight. Thank you everyone for watching. I will see you next on Tuesday, and of course WilmsFront, as I said, and of course you can catch the podcast version of this show by going to timwilms.com, which also has my social media links. So hope you enjoyed tonight. We'll see you next show.
Thanks for tuning in to WilmsFront. Visit timwilms.com or Rational Rise TV to view the archive of episodes. And keep visiting theunshackled.net to view all our shows, and to keep up with the latest real news and analysis.